Trail of frequent violent riots in Minneapolis affected your efforts to promote the work of protesters, activists, and elected officials pushing
on the violent protests or the violence and the rioting happening during the protests really pulls away from what is actually happening. The real story of the trauma and the pain and the reason why folks are out on the ground doing the work, why we are traumatized as a community, why we are doing this work together. So the media is looking for a sensational story, and talking about the public health approach to public safety is not that sexy. So it's easy.
To answer the entire question. When I was in the state legislature, back in Illinois, we passed one of the first, if not the first, laws in traffic stops. And there was no way to get that passed without support of the FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police, the primary organization of the police unions. And the argument I was able to make to them was that police officers, if there is greater trust and less tension, that they will be able to do their jobs better if they have data that has been collected, that is clear, and police chiefs are going to be able to manage their forces more effectively. They will be less distracted by things that don't require an armed response, and they can refocus attention in ways that are good for them as well as the community. And it took a long time to make that argument, and I'm sure that there are rank and file members who didn't believe it. But in fact, after we passed it, we started being able to collect data on that issue, and we were able to get them to go along. Now, how responsive the police union is going to be in any circumstance, it's going to go city by city, and it's not easy. But I guess the point I am making, and Eric Holder, if he's still on, may want to chime in on this. I do think there is police leadership that recognizes the need for change. But changing culture is hard. And sometimes the dynamics within the unions themselves are difficult. And sometimes there's that sense of we need to close ranks even though we know some things are messed up. And so finding ways to listen and recognize that they have a tough job, but also then insist that this is what we need to do. We're going to do it. We'll work with you to figure out how to do it. So when Brittany talked about the 8 can't wait, you should have a dialogue to find out what specific things are a problem with not having to choke somebody, particularly when they're already in handcuffs. What is it that you think is a problem? When you force people to articulate what it is that they object to with reasonable demands of the sort that have been outlined, a lot of times they come up empty. But you have to engage in that conversation. And I think that it's possible to get that done. At the end of the day, though, if you don't have the political pressure to do it, they will resist. Just because the status quo always resists without some pressure. And that's why it's so important, both for the protests and for the follow-up that people like Councilman Cunningham can apply.
coming from Dr. Jim Bostic in Yonkers, New York. First, he thanks our panelists and says his question is, how do we effectively integrate the generational differences in age and history often see develop between our younger generation and those of us who have been in this fight for many decades in such a way that we respect each other's ideas and approaches to dealing with institutional racism in our respective communities and not diminish the role and the will of either.
So with people like myself who have some years behind them, and the arrogance of youth cannot be the determinant. The arrogance of age can't be a determinant. There is wisdom through lived experience. There's idealism that young people possess in abundance, and it's a combination of that idealism with that experience that I think makes the most effective movements. People who are older have to understand that young people have always been at the forefront of positive change in this nation. I mean, the founding fathers were really young people. The oldest Federalist was George Washington. He was only 44 years old. Richard Pryor used to say that you don't see many old fools. And so I think young people need to understand that as well. You don't get to be 60, 70, 80 years old without having navigated a whole series of things that's worthwhile. And you have things as a young person you might want to test, theories you want to try. Older people can say, well, I've experienced this, and this is why this theory is not going to work. So it is a combination of the two, and a lack of arrogance on the part of both that ultimately can create a coalition that can be successful.
Keep working and stay hopeful. As I said, this is a moment, and we've had moments like this before where people are paying attention. And that doesn't mean that everything will get solved. And so don't get disheartened, because there's a marathon, not a sprint. But the fact that people are paying attention provides an opportunity to educate, activate, mobilize, and act. I hope that we are able to seize this moment. I hope the mayors across the country who have either been watching or hear about this take that pledge to start immediately implementing some steps that can make a difference. And I hope all the young people who've been inspired and engaged and involved, they keep at it, because that's what ultimately is going to create the kind of country we want. And for those who have been talking about protests, just remember, this country was founded on protest. It is called the American Revolution. And every step of progress in this country, every expansion of freedom, every expression of our deepest ideals has been won through efforts that made the status quo uncomfortable. And we should all be thankful for folks who are willing, in a peaceful, disciplined way, to be out there making a difference. So thank you so much, everybody. Proud of you.